Big news on the student debt cancellation movement this week, and looking ahead to next week, that news could continue to be very big for a whole lot of people around the country. Jen Psaki was asked about the Biden administration's plans to cancel student debt after Senator Chuck Schumer said that he thinks Biden is getting closer to taking executive action that would cancel student debt. Here's what Psaki said.
Follow up on the student loan forgiveness. You said that the president is looking at a range of options with regards to canceling some student debt, but is the president looking at any options for those students and parents who saved and sacrificed so that they wouldn't have to take out such massive loans? Is he looking at including them in relief retroactively? How would they be made whole if there was some sort of canceling of debt?
You mean for people who have paid off all of their student loans?
Who made sacrifices so that they wouldn't have to take out some of those loans?
It's a good question. What I can tell you at this point is that there's legislation he'd be happy to sign for individuals who have $10,000 in existing student debt. If Congress wanted to send that to him, he'd be happy to sign it, and he's looking at executive actions and authorities. But I don't have anything to preview on that front.
It is a good question, and I think, in fact, it is the question, both politically and morally, for Democrats. The second question that a friend of the show, Philip, asked was basically also, how can you cut costs in higher education? Because this is basically a subsidy that provides no incentives for them to cut costs. I think Ryan and I are going to disagree bitterly on this topic, which is great. And my basic takeaway here is that the right, I think, has downplayed people concerned about their student loans as snowflakes and all of that, and that is not good. I think student loan debt is a travesty. The political establishment, I tweeted as much, they sold the middle class totally a false bill of goods about a college education being your ticket to the middle class. They gave Big Ed huge subsidies, which ended up making education unaffordable. The tuition costs have skyrocketed because of those subsidies, and you can debate how much the subsidies have contributed to that rise, but they have absolutely contributed to that rise. And so a cancellation, I think, to the point of the dad that confronted Elizabeth Warren very memorably in Iowa saying, I did everything right, and I'm being punished for basically paying things off. I think that frustration on a political level is something so deep that the left is underestimating. And when it actually plays out, we'll see more of that. But I also think it's just going to continue to raise costs and make tuition unaffordable and make that ticket to the middle class less and less attainable for folks going forward.
And I think there are a lot of legitimate counter arguments, though, to make to that dad.
Bring them on.
Who stands up. I mean, one would be, look, when it was much cheaper when you went, and jobs were much more plentiful when you graduated. So it's sort of like these boomers who are like, look, I paid for my college with a paper route. It's like, good. Kids today would love to pay for their college with a paper route. It's $60,000 a year to go to a lot of these colleges. The second legitimate counter argument to that guy would be like, you're a dad, you have kids? So good for you. You made it. The system has fallen apart since then. And you want to just throw your children into a completely broken system because you were able to make it through. Now, at the same time that I think that there are legitimate counter arguments, I don't think it's even worth making them. I think that in American politics, you always have to absorb resentment into your political calculus. And so if you're going to be pragmatic, I think you actually have to grapple with that guy's concerns. And so there's a proposal, I think it was Washington State, that has tried to implement it. Let me try this out on you and see if we can get to a policy that I think both sides would actually agree on. What I'd say is that, so cancel all the debt, and then you do have to fix the price problems that Philip talked about. Like the runaway cost is obscene, but first, the couple $1 trillion in debt that we've got to deal with. So let's say you cancel all of it. If somebody who got X amount canceled is making, let's say, more than $100,000 a year, then they owe a surtax, a forgiveness surtax, for the next 20 years or so. So let's say it's 1%, 2%. I think in Washington it was 1 or 2% until, it's basically until that's paid off. So in some ways they're still paying their loan back, but you're only asking the people who genuinely benefited from getting these loans. If you're making less than $30,000 a year, then you're not going to pay those loans back anyway. A huge portion of these loans are in default. So all you're doing at that point is rationalizing the system, saying, fine, look, your debt is canceled. We're going to take this black mark off your credit score. We're going to give you a chance to kind of lift yourself up, but we're not going to try to throw another 1 or 2% surtax on top of your on top of your salary. So I feel like if people had to pay that surtax, then the dad complaining that he did everything right wouldn't feel so bad. He'd be like, okay, well, they're still paying their fair share. What do you think?
Well, then why not just, instead of doing universal cancellation, do a cancellation plan that is graduated or contingent upon circumstance?
Because it's so complicated. In fact, and we can talk about this later, he might end up having to cancel all student debt just because the system is broken. Like the servicers, because it's been paused for so long, haven't been keeping up with where people are. A bunch of the servicers have said, we don't even want to work with the Department of Education anymore. It might logistically be impossible for the federal government to restart collecting the money again. If you add on top of that, only collect it from people who made X amount of money over the last 3 years. And if they made 20% less than that, you collect 20% less. If they made 30% more than that, you collect 30% more. Like the more complicated you make it, the less likely it is that they can actually implement it. So it's just much simpler to say, you know what, fine, we're done. This was broken. It didn't work. There was obviously a design flaw in how we put this together. We're canceling it. If you got debt cancellation and you make more than $100,000, you owe this surtax. Like that, the IRS can actually handle. To have the Department of Education try to figure out this other thing, and also, people lose their jobs all the time. People go through life crises. Like people go through a couple years of making good money, then they go through a couple years of being in trouble. So when they're getting into trouble, do they have to then reapply to the Department of Education? It's just like, why create all this extra bureaucracy when you could just simply do it this way? It would be my argument.
Right, and although I still see the surcharge as extra bureaucracy because it's different than what we have now, although that does make more sense, but I still think there's no responsible way to cancel everything if it is not coupled with cost control measures, because it takes away incentives. Even it's sort of like exactly what happened with Build Back Better, and that's why people like AOC were totally vindicated in not voting for it, in that you lose the leverage. If you cancel the student debt without cost controls, you're just going to give Big Ed, which I think is appropriately referred to as Big Ed, it is a special interest group that puts a lot of money into our politics. If you just give the incentive to continue raising costs without anything to stop that process in motion, I think it just gets worse and worse for kids down the line.
And the paradox is that we're at a place where we might we're already seeing serious bankruptcies with liberal arts colleges.
Yes.
And over the next 10 years, we might see a massive portion of them just vanish. Mm-hmm. And the U.S.'s great global strength has long been our education system, not public, but our higher education system, both public and private. And so we're going the wrong direction on that. We're getting more bloated administrations at universities
Yes.
that are surviving, and instead of seeing more schools, because what you need to do is you need to have many more, particularly public schools that are more affordable, that then drive down the private costs. Instead, we're seeing many fewer, and so that's the crisis that needs to be dealt with. Because just like when a plant closes, let's say there's a town of 5,000 people and a plant that employs 500, which is actually almost like precisely my hometown. If that plant closes, like that town also collapses. But the same is true with universities. If you have a town of 10,000 people and a 2,000 person university, that university is kind of the beating heart of that town. And as we start to see closures of these around the country, you're going to just see more and more collapse, particularly in rural America.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question about it. This is going to continue to be big news throughout the midterm cycle. It's a priority of the Biden administration. It's certainly a priority of the left. And so it's going to continue playing out politically. And certainly I think we'll hear more about it in the week ahead. Ryan, I really hope you are feeling better. I mean that sincerely, even though I think it's hilarious this happened at a Fish concert.
Yeah, if you're going to get COVID, where better place to get it than at a Fish show?
Do it big. Seriously, I hope you feel better, Ryan. Had another fun episode here of Rising Fridays. It's just a great way to start the weekend. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're also available anywhere you listen to your podcasts. So make sure to check that out as well. We will be back with you next Friday, and hopefully Ryan will be here in person with bells on.
Fingers crossed.
Happy weekend, everyone.
See you there.